Hello everybody, this is the Freelance Teacher. This is your GED Report number 2, and we're talking about the narrative. And I have the title as "The Narrative is an Intellectual Tunnel" because that's exactly what it is. And so a couple of things need to be defined if we're going to talk about this topic, because the narrative is, I don't think it's totally unable to be defined pretty substantially and pretty overarchingly. When you talk about the narrative, when anybody does, the narrative is generally, and this is a very general definition, it's what large institutions seem to be wanting the crowd to believe, right? And now here in the United States, you have 3 huge institutions that do a lot of narrative management. And I'm talking, of course, about the university campus, the people surrounding it, the people in Hollywood, the people surrounding them, and the mainstream media and all of the people in its orbit. A couple of years ago, I would have said the government, just lock, stock, and barrel, but the Trump administration, for all of its negative points, seems to be giving the mainstream media the stiff arm and isn't automatically in lockstep with the media. And you can see this by the media's reaction to anything Trump does. I mean, I don't think there are any exceptions, so I'll say literally everything Donald Trump says, the media is going to react screamingly, negatively, shrill-like, and just talking about how horrible the things he says or does, how horrible they are. Left unsaid, of course, is some funny situations where if Donald Trump were to talk about nationwide gun control, you'd suddenly see the mainstream media talking about making sure everybody has a pistol in their pocket and that gun control laws should be repealed. But that's a thought exercise for another day. So the narrative is this intellectual tunnel where and I'm talking to not only legions of fans, I'm talking to all the young people who pay attention to my work. The narrative is a tunnel from which you should not veer. So you're in a tunnel, an ideological tunnel, and you're not supposed to veer from that path. And what I mean with this kind of thing politically, there are a couple of things. I actually put notes down for this one. A political R versus D debate is one. The college degree and school is the second part of the narrative analysis. Diet is the third thing I have on my list. And we'll summarize with a little bit of talk on groupthink and the dangers of following the hive mind and how it can get you into serious trouble. But examples of this narrative that you're supposed to have, and again, I'm in the tri-state area. I live in New York City in the Bronx, and I work at Mount Vernon High School. And the narrative in our area is that politically, the people with a D after their name, Democrats, are good, and the people with an R after their name, well, those people are bad. And it's typified in an example from my job where Common Core in the schools has, of course, run roughshod over everything, and Common Core is a mess, to say the least, and it actually hurts teachers and the way things are rated with the exams and what have you that they put forth. Those exams count on our ratings. So I had a colleague, talking about how he hated Common Core. So I said, well, why did you vote for our Democratic governor when he's on record as being pro-Common Core and everything and every educational corporation and every policy that is involved with it? And he said, and I quote, "I just can't see myself voting for a Republican." Now, I've mentioned this before in other video casts, but that's somebody who is stuck in a tunnel. That is somebody who is a victim, a serf to the narrative. Because you can't vote for a Republican, I will take at my job exams. I will take in exams that students take and do poorly on. I will be held accountable in a manner that is completely unfair and ridiculous because I can't see myself voting for a Republican. And the Republican candidate, it was a guy named Rob Astorino at the time, was on board completely against Common Core, thought it was a terrible thing, and spoke quite well against Common Core. So that's somebody who's stuck. Well, maybe it would be possible. I have no love for the Republican Party. I'm not a registered Republican. I rarely vote Republican. But that's somebody who couldn't do that, could not vote Republican because, well, the narrative says that Democrats are good, Republicans are bad. And just repeat it over and over again. Like they do on college campuses. They just chant stuff. Chant, R good, R bad, D good, R bad, D good. It's like Animal Farm. This is why we read books. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And when the animals in Animal Farm have a meeting, there's a group of animals that just start chanting. They just start chanting 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And it's very much like the political narrative that we are left to suffer under, particularly in this part of the country, the Northeast, of this unflinching thou shalt not veer from the narrative. Right? And of course the arguments you get are standard. Oh, it means you are a Republican, you love Bush, you love Trump, you love Mitt Romney. Like, people just, of course, descend into madness. And it's very unpleasant to watch. Very quick instance actually happened today. I posted this Kavanaugh stuff with the Kavanaugh hearings / media farce that has become this confirmation process. I do what I usually do with a lot of these things, not as much on social media anymore, but I put up the other side. A guy named John C. Wright is an accomplished writer, very bright, skilled rhetorician, and a real man of letters. And so he wrote his take on the Kavanaugh hearings. Now, of course, it's the other, quote-unquote, other side. And right away, a person I went to high school with, she was all offended by it, called it fake news, because one of the things mentioned in the article was seen by the Washington Post as untrue. So this 4chan business with Kavanaugh, one of the accusers, Wright, had said that her accusations were just part of a hoax, and the Washington Post, of course, coming to the rescue, saying, no. That person, that accuser of Kavanaugh, is real. So this person in the tunnel says, because of that, there's no way Wright would have known this. He wrote the thing 5 days ago. She was all angry and her feelings were hurt. And she even said, how do you think this made me feel reading this? And all the other women who read this, how do you think it makes us feel? Now, nobody cares about how you feel. There are always 2 sides to a story, at least 2 sides to a story. In this case, there's probably 4 sides. But no, Kavanaugh, because these women have come out of the woodwork, 5 minutes to midnight, throwing a Hail Mary pass, women that if it were your father or your husband or your boyfriend, you wouldn't be so receptive to their claims. And you know you wouldn't. So these women come out of the woodwork, and guess what? She's offended that the other side is out there. And how do you think this makes me feel? Well, the narrative says that your feelings matter. The narrative says feelings are what guide us. Not reason, not evidence, not proof or a court case or a statute of limitations or the legal principles that have built the West, the part of the world that everybody seems to want to come to. Right? Because remember, the narrative says the West is evil. It's colonialist and racist and oppressive. Well, that's weird. If that's the case, why is everybody beating down the door to come to such a horrible place? I don't know. I go to a college campus, I find out that as a heterosexual white male, I'm a terrible person. I've even been told that. I've even had someone try to fire me for it. So if that's the case, and the United States is, at last look, 65% white, why would anyone want to be here? It doesn't make any sense. Maybe Switzerland should be abolished because it's even more vanilla than the United States. But I digress. Second thing with the narrative is college degree and school. You're told that you have to go for 12 years, culminating with 2 million minutes of high school, 7 hours a day, go to 6 or 7 classes, 45 minutes each. That will confer upon you a high school diploma, and then you have to go to college because then you need to use it to get a good job. Now that narrative is crumbling much slower than I thought. But you see people going into all kinds of financial situations that are just untenable because the narrative says unless you get a college diploma, you are a failure. Now, the fact that some of these university degrees cost $100,000, some of them cost $200,000, some of them cost $50,000. And if you don't have the money for it, you're supposed to go take out a college loan. And your college loan can't be expelled from your record through a bankruptcy process like it used to be. But you're still supposed to go to college after high school and get a diploma, because if you don't, you are a failure, you won't get a good job, you're a B-lister, you're a backbencher, you're junior varsity, all of these kinds of things. Even though in today's world and today's economy, with the internet getting stronger and more prevalent, that premise is clearly false, and it's even more false if you look at the price. Third thing, diet. I grew up in an era of low-fat food. What I mean is, we were told that whole milk, forget about raw milk, whole milk yogurt, cheese, dairy, eggs, and then red meat were the fast track to a heart attack. The USDA, very quietly, I believe it was 2010 or 11, and then 2015, changed their regulations and recommendations. And they did that because it turns out that, well, that no-fat, low-fat stuff isn't necessarily the way to go. Time magazine, even on the cover, had "Butter is Back," I think was the title. They had a spoon scooping out a big thing, a nice creamy yellow butter. And so when you take a look at what's happened to American health and what has happened to the American food industry and who controls the FDA and the USDA, things get very, very murky. Yet the narrative says you're supposed to pay attention to big food and big medical and the USDA and the FDA. Forget about what Joel Salatin says or what you see on Food Inc. or Food Matters or Chris Kresser or any of these other people who are talking about, well, maybe these people were wrong. And maybe in an era back, you go 100 years, when people were eating a lot more meat and dairy and natural food, natural vegetables, farm-raised meat, Americans were healthier. But no. The narrative says, well, here's what we did, and you really should still pay attention to it. Right? The USDA says eat this, and we're going to use these guidelines. That's what they use for school lunches. That's what you're feeding your kids at school. So I thought that's a narrative that would end, another narrative that would end more quickly. But if people are herd animals, people really will follow the herd until the explosion or the implosion. The housing crisis showed this. Everybody knew that houses would only go up in price until they didn't. And everybody knew that these, debt instruments that were out there and this way for housing, where the banks were getting rich, was the only way to go until the whole thing fell apart. So the herd thing, there's a quote out there that says people are herd animals and they'll basically go to their destruction following the herd. And that's groupthink. That's my last quick point. I've talked about this a lot. There's nothing inherently wrong with following the group. However, because a group of people or a large number of people believe or say something does not inherently mean that it's true. I think it's Anatole France said something along the lines of, 300,000 people could say something foolish, but if it's foolish, even though they say it, it's still foolish. I'm butchering that quote, but it's the power of groupthink. It's a logical fallacy. Because a huge number of people believe or say something, therefore it is true. It's just false. Right? The earth was flat until it wasn't. The small number of people who say things in the science world and the other worlds, those are the ones that change, not the group. So the narrative will keep you shackled. That's intellectual slavery. You're allowed to choose a different path. and that path should be your own path, not the group's.